Nobody wanted giant virgin bride until the rancher's little girl asked, "Can you be my mama?" They called her a monster behind her back, crossed themselves when she passed, whispered that God had cursed her with size instead of beauty. But 4-year-old Annie didn't see a giant. She saw gentle hands that could lift her to pick apples, strong arms that could carry her when she was tired, and kind eyes that looked at her like she was precious. In that moment, when innocence chose love over appearance, both their worlds changed forever. Because sometimes the biggest people have the biggest hearts, and the smallest voices speak the loudest truth. The snow hadn't stopped in 2 days. It swept across the train platform like a ghost, stinging skin, soaking hems, coating everything in a pale silence. The passengers had long since scattered, those with somewhere to be, someone to meet, someone waiting. But she remained, sitting hunched on the far bench, feet bare against the icy boards, hands wrapped around a weather-worn satchel. Her dress clung to her legs like frozen paper. Her shoulders, though broad and strong, curled inward with shame. Nobody had come for her. The man who wrote the letters, "Can't wait to see you, my sweet prairie angel," had taken one look at her when she stepped off the train and mumbled, "This must be a joke." He hadn't even waited for her reply. Just turned, hat low, and walked off into the snow. She didn't chase him. She'd already known. The way people stared. The way the platform grew quieter when she stepped off the train, her heavy boots crunching like a threat. She'd known all her life what it felt like to be too much, too tall, too wide, too different. But this hurt anyway. She stared at the snow clinging to her skirt, watching it harden the fabric. She hadn't eaten since yesterday. The station master had muttered something about no refunds for arrangements gone cold, then disappeared inside his office. And now she was alone, except for the men on the other bench. 3 of them, drunk by the way they laughed. They hadn't stopped whispering since the last train pulled out. The way they looked at her wasn't curiosity. It was hunger, tainted by mockery. One man nudged the other with his elbow. "She's got nowhere to go." "She's bigger than my ox," the second chuckled. "Might be warm though." The third stood. Older, unshaven. Eyes dull from whiskey, but legs steady enough to swagger toward her. "You lost, sweetheart?" he slurred, lips curling. She tightened her grip on the satchel. Didn't speak. Her mouth felt frozen shut. The man stepped closer, boots cracking the snow. "I said you lost? Or you waitin' for a man who doesn't want you?" She looked up, finally. Her voice shook but came out. "Please, leave me be." He laughed. "You're sittin' alone. Cold. Hungry. You look like you could use a man's company. Or maybe," a voice cut in, calm but sharp, "you should learn what no means." The drunk froze. Turned. A man stepped out of the snow's blur, tall, broad, coat dusted in white, jaw tight. In his arms, a little girl blinked from beneath a woolen hood, clinging to a stuffed lamb. The drunk raised both hands. "Didn't mean trouble, Colt." "You're always trouble when you drink, Brant," the man replied. "Back off." The drunk hesitated, then grumbled something and shuffled back to his bench, where the others had already gone quiet. The wind howled again. The woman on the bench didn't move. Colt McCrae stepped forward. Up close, he saw her eyes, frightened, but not fragile. She didn't look like a damsel. She looked like someone who had survived years of cold stares. Someone who had fought to hope, and was losing that fight. He knelt slowly, shifting his daughter in one arm. "You can't stay out here. Not in this." She didn't respond. So he did something that stunned her more than the cold. He took off his heavy coat, thick wool lined with flannel, and draped it over her shoulders. Her eyes widened. Her fingers trembled. Then, before she could react, he gently placed his daughter in her arms. "She's warm," Colt said softly. "You hold her a second. I'll hitch the horses." The girl didn't cry. She simply looked up at this enormous stranger, blinked once, then settled against her chest like it was the most natural thing in the world. The woman gasped. Not from fear, but from something older. Forgotten. It had been so long since someone had leaned into her warmth without flinching. She cradled the child instinctively, like she'd done it 1,000 times. Her huge hands wrapped around the small bundle of scarf and wool and trust. The coat smelled like pine smoke and earth. The little girl smelled like vanilla and sleep. Colt returned with a sled drawn by 2 shaggy horses. He helped her to her feet. She stood slowly, the child still nestled in her arms, the satchel slung over one massive shoulder. "You got a name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Susanna." "Susanna," he nodded. "I'm Colt. That's Annie." She glanced at the child. Annie looked back at her and smiled. Then, in the kind of voice that children use when they're not asking, just knowing, Annie said, "Can you be my mama?" Colt froze. Susanna blinked, stunned. The child said it again, softer this time. "Mama, I want her." Something broke inside Susanna. Not in a painful way, but in the way of frozen lake cracks in spring. Tears welled up. She didn't answer. Just kissed the girl's forehead and followed Colt into the sled. No one spoke the entire ride through town. The horses trudged slowly through Saddle Creek, past porches with watching eyes, past doors with curtains twitching. People saw. They always saw. But Colt didn't care. He gripped the reins, jaw tight, gaze fixed ahead. Susanna didn't dare meet anyone's eyes. But she held Annie like she belonged there. Like maybe, just maybe she did. The sled turned toward the mountains. Toward a cabin tucked against the ridge. Toward the first warmth she'd felt in years. And behind them, whispers began to grow. But the storm ahead? It wasn't outside. It was the one brewing inside a woman who'd spent her whole life being told she was too much. And was finally being asked to be everything. The cabin smelled like wood smoke and soap. When Colt opened the door, the heat wrapped around Susanna like a blanket. It didn't just warm her skin, it sank into her bones, like something she hadn't felt since childhood. Annie stirred in her arms, still half asleep, her small cheek pressed against Susanna's shoulder. "You can put her in the green room," Colt said quietly, nodding toward the back. "It's warmer than it sounds." Susanna didn't answer. She just followed the hallway, stepping carefully on the creaking floorboards. The room was small, barely wider than a bed, but it had quilts on the cot and a lantern on the wall. She laid Annie down slowly, pulling the blankets up to her chin. The child didn't stir. Susanna lingered. Just a moment. Just to memorize the peace on the girl's face. Back in the main room, Colt had placed a tin mug of coffee on the table. He didn't look at her when she returned, just gestured toward the cup. "You need food. I'll make something." She shook her head. "No, please. Let me." He didn't stop her. She moved like someone who had always been useful but never welcome. She found the pot, poured water from the kettle, and reached for the dried potatoes. Her hands, huge, calloused, rough from years of hard labor, were clumsy with the small kitchen tools. She knocked a tin of salt off the shelf. She whispered apologies for every sound she made. Colt said nothing. The stew burned. She'd meant to stir it, meant to keep the fire low. But her thoughts drifted. What if he changed his mind like the others? What if tomorrow he told her to leave? What if the town's whispers grew louder? The smell hit first. Then Colt's voice, sharp. "What in God's name?" She turned in horror, yanked the pot off the stove, but it was too late. The meat was black, the broth bitter, smoke curling from the edges. I followed what I remembered. Back home," she stammered. "You'll burn the place down if you keep guessing," Colt snapped, grabbing the stove door and swinging it open. The cold rushed in. The smoke poured out. Susanna flinched like she'd been slapped. "Sorry," she whispered, stepping back. He didn't answer. Didn't even look at her. She ran. Out the door, into the snow, across the yard and into the barn. Her shoes slipped in the powder. Her breath came in sobs. She collapsed into a pile of hay and covered her face. She had tried so hard. To be small. To be useful. To be less. But it was never enough. Not for the town. Not for men. Not for this place. Maybe not even for him. Above her, snow tapped gently against the barn roof. The wind howled. The horses shuffled, restless in their stalls. She didn't know how long she sat there, arms around her knees, body trembling, not from cold but from shame. Then she heard it. A sound too soft to be wind. Too steady to be a creak. A knock. Not on the barn door. On the side wall. Confused, she stood slowly and peered around the corner. No one. Another knock. She turned toward the cabin. And saw it. Her door. The green room. Standing open. Inside, a figure. Wild curls framing her face. Nightgown fluttering in the breeze. Annie. In one hand, a single shortbread cookie. I saved one, she said softly. Susanna blinked. You didn't have to. Papa yells a lot, Annie said matter-of-factly. But he likes when someone stays. The words landed harder than any insult ever had. Then the child walked forward, arms out, and hugged Susanna's legs tight. The cookie crumbled between them. Susanna dropped to her knees. And cried. Not loud. Not broken. But the kind of crying that comes when someone touches the part of your heart you forgot still worked. That night, she didn't sleep on the cot. She slept beside Annie, the little girl curled into her chest like she'd always belonged there. And maybe she had. Morning brought pale light through the frost-covered windows. Susanna woke first. She pulled the wool blanket around Annie and stepped into the kitchen, determined. This time, she boiled water carefully. This time, she stirred the porridge slow. This time, she folded the clothes hanging by the stove and brushed the ashes from the hearth. Colt walked in mid-morning, snow dusted across his shoulders. He stopped. The table was set. The fire calm. The cabin smelled like cinnamon and warmth. You didn't have to do all this, he said. I wanted to, Susanna replied. Then softer. It's the least I can do. He nodded, and for the first time, the lines in his brow eased. Later that afternoon, while he chopped wood, Susanna filled a small tub with warm water and bathed Annie. The child giggled and splashed, the room echoing with the sound of laughter that hadn't lived there in a long time. Colt paused mid-swing, listening. He set the axe down. Watched from the frosted window. The girl in the water. The woman kneeling beside her. Humming softly. He didn't smile. But he stayed at that window longer than he meant to. That night, Susanna stood by the stove drying her hands. She asked me if I was going to stay, she said, not looking at him. Colt looked up from the saddle strap he'd been polishing. What did you say? I told her, I don't know yet. He nodded slowly. She doesn't talk to many. Not since her mama passed. Susanna turned. Sat across from him. Her eyes raw. I came out here thinking someone wanted me, she said. That maybe I could belong somewhere. He didn't interrupt. But the man who wrote me said I was just a scared kid. Too big. Too loud. He said I looked like I'd scare the horses. Colt's hand stilled. Silence. Only the fire cracked. Then, without looking up, he said, there ain't nothing wrong with being scared. Means you still care what happens. She stared at him. For the first time, not as a stranger, but as a man who saw her pain and didn't flinch. That night, she went to sleep with her hand resting on Annie's back. And when she woke up, her torn dress, the one ripped on the train, was neatly mended at the foot of her bed. No note. No mention. But the thread was thick, uneven, and carefully tied. She hadn't asked. He hadn't said a word. But he'd seen. And fixed it. Not because she was weak. But because she mattered. The storm outside was quiet that day. But the one inside her had begun to melt. And somewhere deep within her chest, behind all the years of rejection and hurt, something began to bloom. Not quite love. Not yet. But the space for it. And sometimes that's more powerful than love itself. The snow was beginning to melt, but the stairs never thawed. By the second week, the whole town knew. Or thought they did. She's shacked up with Colt McCrae, a woman whispered at the mercantile, snatching her child's hand when Susanna reached for the same jar of preserves. Heard she was supposed to marry someone else. Got ditched. Poor Colt must be desperate. She's probably hoping he's lonely enough to keep her. At first, Susanna tried to ignore it. She kept her head down, her hands busy, her voice soft. But the looks followed her. Even at church. Especially at church. Women wouldn't share pews. Men wouldn't meet her eye. Children pointed. So she stopped going. But the whispers still found her. Colt said nothing about it. Just kept chopping wood, feeding horses, fixing fence posts. But she could feel the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes scanned every room they entered together. He heard it. Then came the final blow. They were in town for feed. Annie was perched on Colt's hip, scarf tucked up to her cheeks. Susanna stood by the sleigh, quiet, waiting. Colt's old friend, Harper, strode out of the store, red-faced from whiskey and wind. He saw them, grinned too wide, clapped Colt on the back. "Well, look at you," he said, loud enough for half the street to hear. "What's next? Marry her and open a daycare?" Susanna froze. Colt didn't laugh. Didn't say a word. Just turned and walked past Harper without a single glance. But it was too late. She had heard. That night, Colt worked outside stacking firewood by the barn. Susanna packed. She didn't cry. She folded her one other dress, the handkerchief from her grandmother, the apron she wore every morning. All of it fit into her satchel. The same one she carried off the train. The same one she'd been left holding alone. She waited until Annie was asleep, then slipped out the door. The cold hit like a slap, but it was nothing compared to the heat in her chest. Shame burned hotter than winter. She didn't know where she'd go. East maybe. Or south. She'd find a train. Find somewhere that didn't care what size her shoulders were. She just knew she couldn't stay where she wasn't wanted. She made it past the fence before she heard his voice. "Where you going?" She turned. Colt was standing in the dark, snow clinging to his coat, breath steaming in the air. "I need to leave," she said. "Why?" She swallowed hard. "Because I'm tired of pretending like I belong where I clearly don't." He stepped forward. "You're not just some mouth to feed." "Then what am I?" she snapped, trembling. "Because all I see are people laughing behind my back, saying I'm a joke. A giant girl playing house." Colt didn't blink. His voice stayed low. Steady. "You're someone this place didn't know it needed." She froze. "I've run this ranch alone for years," he said. "Thought I had it figured out. Me and Annie. Chores, fences, silence." He took another step. "But then you walked in. And now there's warmth in the mornings. Laughter in the halls. Annie smiles more. I smile more. I burn dinner," she said. He nodded. "And stayed up late fixing the hem on her dress. And braided her hair better than I ever could." She looked down. "I don't need help folding laundry," he said. "I need someone who gives a damn. And you do." Susanna's breath caught. "You don't belong to them," he said. "Not the folks in town. Not the man who left you at the station. You belong wherever you decide you do." The wind tugged at her shawl. Colt stepped forward and gently took the satchel from her hand. "You're not leaving tonight." Her lips parted. "And tomorrow?" He hesitated, then softened. "Tomorrow you'll still be needed here." She didn't speak. Just nodded. They walked back together, side by side. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she was trailing behind someone. She felt beside him. But the storm hadn't passed. Not yet. 2 days later, it started with a cough. Then a fever. Annie's cheeks flushed red, her eyes glazed. Her breath came fast and shallow. Colt panicked. "I'll get Doc Rigsby," he said, grabbing his coat. "You won't make it," Susanna warned. "The pass is frozen. You'll get stuck." "Then what do? We keep her warm. We wait. We pray." And they did. All night. Susanna never left Annie's side. She stripped off layers of quilts, then added more. She boiled water, laid cool cloths on her forehead, stoked the fire until sweat dripped down her back. Annie whimpered in her sleep. "She likes your voice," Colt said once from the doorway. "I'm not singing for her," Susanna whispered. "I'm singing for hope." Colt didn't answer, but he stayed in the room. The whole night. Silent. Watching. At dawn, the sky turned gray-blue. Not light. Just less dark. Susanna's eyes were hollow. Her hair clung to her face. Her hands trembled. Annie lay curled in her arms, a little furnace of worry. Then, suddenly, her lashes fluttered. "Papa," she croaked. Colt stepped forward, nearly stumbling. But Annie turned her head into Susanna's chest and murmured, "Mama stayed." Colt froze. His throat worked, but no sound came. Susanna's eyes filled. I heard her, he said finally, kneeling beside them. His hand touched Susanna's sleeve. I didn't teach her that, she whispered. You didn't have to. They sat there, the three of them. No vows. No titles. Just choice. Just love, finally calling itself by name. The fever broke. And the family began. The snow melted slowly that year. It didn't vanish overnight. It receded like a tide too proud to leave all at once. But every day the hills grew browner. Then greener. The stream behind the barn gurgled again. Shoots of life pushed stubbornly through the mud. The ranch came alive. So did the cabin. Where once it echoed with silence, now it breathed. Susanna moved through it with quiet rhythm, feeding hens, braiding Annie's hair, stirring pots that no longer burned. She hummed without noticing. Lit lanterns before sunset. Folded Colt's shirts with care and placed them in the same drawer every time, even when he left them crumpled. She belonged. And the cabin knew it. She was no longer the girl clinging to a satchel at a train station, hoping someone would want her. She was the woman who tucked a child in at night, who laughed when coffee spilled, who pressed kisses into tiny hands and didn't flinch when Colt brushed her back on the way to the door. Each morning, Colt saddled up early. But before he rode out, he always passed through the kitchen, where Susanna stood barefoot in her robe pouring coffee. He would rest his hand on her lower back and say, "Back before supper, darling." Always darling now. And he always came back. Annie followed Susanna everywhere. Copied the way she swept, the way she planted flowers, the way she sang to the goats. Once, Susanna caught her standing at the mirror, twisting her curls and whispering, "Big is beautiful," because Susanna had said it the day before when brushing her own hair. And the town? It watched. The women who once turned away now asked her how she got Annie to sleep through storms. The man who once laughed in the feed store now tipped his hat. She hadn't demanded respect. She'd earned it. One spring afternoon, while Colt patched a hole in the roof and Susanna kneaded dough on the porch table, Annie came running, fists clenched. "Look what I made." She slapped a crayon drawing on the wood. 3 stick figures. One tall with yellow hair. One in a cowboy hat. One small, smiling. A cabin. A sun. A red heart in the middle. "This is Mama. This is Papa. This is me." Colt froze mid-nail. Susanna's hands stopped moving. No words. Just silence. Then Susanna leaned down, kissed Annie's curls, and said, "It's perfect, sweetheart." That night, after dishes and chores, Colt took her hand. "Come with me." He led her to the edge of the pasture where the flowers had started blooming. Beneath the trellis he'd built 2 summers ago, twined now with new green, he turned to face her. "I thought I buried my heart the day Annie's mama died," he said softly. "But you made it beat again." Susanna swallowed. "I didn't come here looking for love," she whispered. "I didn't even know what it felt like." "No one ever taught me how to start again," Colt said. "But you made it seem simple." He reached into his vest. No box. No ring. Just a bundle of cloth. He opened it. Inside, a tiny carved horse. Made from wood. Smooth. Carefully shaped. Around its neck, a ribbon. Beneath its belly, 2 initials burned in. "SM. I made it after that night," he said. "When Annie called you Mama." Susanna's voice cracked. "She still does. Because you are." He stepped closer. Rested his forehead against hers. "Come home with me," he whispered. She blinked. "I'm already here." He smiled. Then held her. Not tight. Not desperate. Just right. At the edge of the yard, little feet pounded across the grass. "Mama." Annie barreled into them, a daisy clutched in one hand. Susanna scooped her up. Colt kissed them both. And under the wide Montana sky, no vows, no preacher, just 3 people holding on. The McCrae family became whole. The cabin never went silent again. Annie grew taller, louder, messy. Susanna grew stronger, not in body, but in confidence. She answered the door with a smile. Held her head up at church. Became the woman young girls watched and older women admired. One night, years later, she found the satchel at the back of the closet. She opened it. Everything was still inside. The apron. The handkerchief. The letter from the man who'd left her. She folded it all neatly and placed it on the fire. Colt didn't ask. He just wrapped his arms around her and kissed her temple as the flames curled upward. That night, Annie fell asleep on her chest while Colt dozed on the porch swing. The stars blinked overhead. The hills were still. And Susanna, once too big, too unwanted, too different, was exactly the size this family needed. Love didn't save her. She saved herself. Love just showed up and stayed. If this story touched something soft inside you, if you've ever felt too much, or not enough, or like the world didn't make room for someone like you, then don't let this moment fade. Tap the hype button. Share it. Because out here in the wild, the loudest truths often come from the smallest voices. And the biggest hearts are the ones that dare to stay.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means a lot.